Ruth Paine and the Sealed JFK Files. Ruth Paine is career CIA. Meet the woman who is why the JFK files will stay sealed until the day she finally dies. Learn about the rumors and facts of Ruth and Michael Paine's ties to the CIA, based on declassified documents and family relationships. See how their sister, father, mother, and brother-in-law were involved with the agency or its cover organizations. Ruth Paine is an unassuming 91-year-old living in a Quaker retirement community in Northern California, and she may hold vital secrets to what has been called the crime of the century. With 60 years having passed since the deaths of John F. Kennedy and Lee Harvey Oswald, only a handful of critical witnesses are still alive. Of that small and ever-dwindling group, Ruth is arguably the single most important. Back in the fall of 1963, the pregnant Russian wife of Lee Oswald, the man who would soon be charged as the alleged assassin of JFK, was living in the home of the 31-year-old Ruth. Back in the fall of 1963, the pregnant Russian wife of Lee Oswald, the man who would soon be charged as the alleged assassin of JFK, was living in the home of the 31-year-old Ruth. Back in the fall of 1963, the pregnant Russian wife of Lee Oswald, the man who would soon be charged as the alleged assassin of JFK, was living in the home of the 31-year-old Ruth. The Quaker woman was separated from her husband, Michael Paine, at the time, which allowed for Marina to move into her home. Although Ruth did not extend the invitation to Lee, he regularly spent weekends there. More importantly, Ruth was instrumental in helping him obtain employment at the Texas School Book Depository, TSBD building, in late October 1963, forever altering the country and the world. This, despite the fact that the TSBD company, for which the building would become infamous, was in a down season and laying off employees. In 1963, Michael Paine left the family home. According to the author Jim Bishop, the day Kennedy was shot, it was a friendly estrangement. Ruth continued to live in Irving, and at a party in February 1963, she was introduced to Marina Oswald and Lee Harvey Oswald by George de Mohrenschildt. On the 24th of April, 1963, Marina and her daughter went to live with Ruth Paine. Lee Harvey Oswald rented a room in Dallas, but stored some of his possessions in Ruth Paine's garage. Ruth also helped Oswald to get a job at the Texas School Book Depository. On the 31st of October, 1963, an FBI agent, James Hosty, visited Paine's home to discover where Oswald was living. He spoke to both Paine and Marina Oswald about Lee Harvey Oswald. When Oswald heard about the visit, he went to the FBI office in Dallas. When told that Hosty was at lunch, Oswald left him a message in an envelope. The contents of the envelope has remained a mystery. A receptionist working at the Dallas office claimed it included a threat to blow up the FBI and the Dallas Police Department if you don't stop bothering my wife. Hosty later claimed it said, "If you have anything you want to learn about me, come talk to me directly. If you don't cease bothering my wife, I will take appropriate action and report this to the proper authorities." According to fellow worker Dave Knoll, Michael Paine discussed the character of assassins a few hours before President John F. Kennedy was killed. He also returned to his home in Irving at 3 p.m. to find Dallas police officers searching the premises. He told the police, "As soon as I found out about it, I hurried over to see if I could help." Anthony Summers reported in his book, The Kennedy Conspiracy, that Michael Paine was overheard talking to his wife on the phone. He said that he was sure that Lee Harvey Oswald had killed John F. Kennedy. He added, "We both know who is responsible." Buddy Walthers took part in the search of the home of Ruth Paine. Walthers told Eric Tagg that they found 6 or 7 metal filing cabinets full of letters, maps, records, and index cards with names of pro-Castro sympathizers. James DeEugenio has argued that this cinches the case that the Paines were domestic surveillance agents in the Cold War against communism. Ruth Paine was a key witness for the Warren Commission and provided detailed information on the activities of Marina Oswald and Lee Harvey Oswald before the assassination. Jim Garrison later suggested that Ruth Paine might have been involved in setting Oswald up as the patsy. Garrison points out that Paine's father had been employed by the Agency for International Development, regarded by many as a source of cover for the CIA. He also claims that he had tried to examine the income tax returns of Ruth and Michael Paine, but I was told that they had been classified as secret. What was so special about this particular family that made the federal government so protective of it? In 2002, Thomas Mallon wrote a book about Ruth Paine's involvement in the case, Mrs. Paine's Garage, and the murder of John F. Kennedy. Unlike Jim Garrison, Mallon took the view that Paine was completely innocent of any involvement in the Kennedy assassination conspiracy. Ruth Paine has worked for a Nicaraguan relief group in St. Petersburg, Florida. She is also a peace activist. In 1982, she claimed, "This year, for the first time, I am withholding that portion of my income tax, 40%, which I estimate goes toward military uses and war preparations." In 2004, she was interviewed by the St. Petersburg Times. "I believe in taxation, I believe in government, but I also believe in our right to religious freedom, and I believe in the fact that we value dissent as a patriotic thing." Interest in Paine's Garage, for example, derives from Oswald having stored his Mannlicher Carcano wrapped in a blanket in that place. But no remnants of having been wrapped in a blanket were ever discovered on the alleged assassination weapon, not the least hairs or fibers, which is very curious indeed, had the weapon actually been stored there. The alleged instrument, a cheap, mass-produced World War II Italian carbine, has a muzzle velocity of around 2,000 FPS, which means that it is not a high-velocity weapon. Since the President's death certificates, 1963, the Warren Report, 1964, and even more recent articles in the Journal of the American Medical Association, 1992, report that JFK was killed by high-velocity bullets, it follows that he was not killed by Oswald's weapon, thereby greatly reducing interest in Mrs. Paine's Garage. Indeed, though it may come as news to the author, many other students of the case, including Harold Weisberg, Whitewash, 1965, Peter Model, and Robert Groden, JFK. The Case for Conspiracy, 1976, and Robert Groden and Harrison Livingstone, High Treason, 1989, have also made the same observation. These are not books cited in this study, however, which raises rather serious questions as to why someone whose knowledge of the assassination appears to be so meager would write a book about it. He does not know that Oswald had a history with American intelligence, that Oswald was being sheep-dipped in New Orleans, that Oswald was an informant for the FBI, that the paper bag story is a fabrication, that Oswald was in the lunchroom on the second floor having a Coke during the shooting, that Oswald passed a paraffin test, and on and on. A weighty body of evidence substantiates all of these discoveries, but none of them is even mentioned, much less disputed, by the author of this book. The sources he does cite, moreover, are far from reassuring. His acknowledgments, for example, lists 6 persons, including Mrs. Paine and her former husband, Michael, Priscilla Johnson McMillan, and John McAdams. McAdams has gained a certain degree of notoriety for his one-sided defense of the lone nut hypothesis, which disregards overwhelming contradictory evidence, including proof that the magic bullet theory is not only false, but anatomically impossible. Priscilla Johnson McMillan, however, is the most intriguing name on this list. It was she who interviewed Oswald on the occasion of his pseudo-defection to the Soviet Union. It was she who was selected by the United States government to accompany Stalin's daughter, Svetlana, when she defected to the United States. And it was she who was chosen to babysit Marina during those turbulent times in the aftermath of the assassination. Her CIA connections virtually qualify as common knowledge. The book endorses the idea that Oswald was responsible for an alleged attempt on the life of Major General Edwin Walker that occurred on the 10th of April, 1963. But there are many reasons to doubt it. The situations were very different. A high-powered 30.06 rifle versus a medium-to-low powered 6.5 mm carbine, a stationary versus moving target, a miss versus 2 hits out of 3. It is difficult to imagine how their varied circumstances could have been less suggestive of a common shooter. Unless, of course, their politics were similar, but Walker was a right-wing general, while Kennedy was a left-wing president. Kennedy had even relieved Walker of his command in Germany. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to conclude that these shootings were not performed by the same shooter. It does provide an opportunity for Thomas Mallon to compose another book. If Lee also had a 30.06 comma, then he had to have stored it somewhere. We can now look forward to a sequel, Mrs. Paine's attic. Malin also asserts that Oswald took a bus and taxi back to his rooming house in Oak Cliffs, where he picked up the pistol that he used minutes later to kill the patrolman, J.D. Tippett, who stopped him at the corner of 10th and Patton. If he were correct about this, Malin offers no reason for thinking so, then Oswald must have been the only assassin in history to make his escape by public transportation. He also ignores evidence that Tippett was shot with automatic S when Oswald was packing a revolver. Ruth Paine's older sister was Sylvia Hyde Hoke. Sylvia was living in Falls Church, Virginia, in 1963. Ruth stayed with Sylvia in September of 1963 while traveling across country. Falls Church adjoins Langley, which was then the new headquarters of the Central Intelligence Agency, a prized project of Allen Dulles. It was from Falls Church that Ruth Paine journeyed to New Orleans to pick up Marina Oswald, who she had been introduced to by George de Mohrenschildt. After she picked Marina up, she deposited her in her home in Irving, Texas, thereby separating Marina from Lee at the time of the assassination. Some later discoveries made Ruth's itinerary in September quite interesting. It turned out that John Hoke, Sylvia's husband, also worked for AID, and her sister Sylvia worked directly for the CIA itself. By the time of Ruth's visit, Sylvia had been employed by the agency for 8 years. In regards to this interestingly timed visit to her sister, Jim Garrison asked Ruth some pointed questions when she appeared before a grand jury in 1968. This is the same woman who was seen at the National Archives poring through her files in 1976 when the House Select Committee was gearing up. When Marina Oswald was called before the same grand jury, a citizen asked her if she still associated with Ruth Paine. Marina replied that she didn't. When asked why not, Marina stated that it was upon the advice of the Secret Service. She then elaborated on this by explaining that they had told her it would look bad if the public found out the connection between me and Ruth and CIA. An assistant DA then asked, "In other words, you were left with the distinct impression that she was in some way connected with the CIA?" Marina replied simply, "Yes." Douglas interpolates the above with the why and how of Oswald ending up on the motorcade route on November 22, 63. Robert Adams of the Texas Employment Commission testified to having called the Paine household at about the time Oswald was referred by Ruth, via a neighbor, to the Texas School Book Depository, TSBD, for a position. Ruth was questioned about the Adams call by the Warren Commission's Albert Jenner. At first, she denied ever hearing of such a job offer. She said, "I do not recall that." P. 172. She then backtracked in a tactical way.